Oh, excuse me. I'm sorry. There you go. Excuse for you. Go ahead, Paul. Run that. There you go. I got you. One minute. You said it was. You would have said more. No, I mean, it's next to. John said John's going to go ahead, yeah, and then we're going to be gone in a second. I knew you didn't have this up there. Well, we're going to try to get back. Oh, I'm sick. Can you please go back? Hey, he's selling people down. I'm trying to listen. You're supposed to be on the other side. I'm on the other side. You. I know his dad. Jesus, yes, I got any balls or anything back there? Balls. Hang on.
Who needs material for tonight on standing firm? Standing firm. All right, Juan. By the way, Juan is in cooperation with another preacher, and their program comes out of Cuba or goes to Cuba. And it's got 500 watches already. Can you speak Cuban?
Spanish.
Oh, they'll understand that. That's close.
Yeah, but it got to be a dialect.
Now, there's got to be an attitude. We got Juan, his scooter today, and he's already put 500 miles on it. Running around. Oh, The what? Oh, it's good. Hey, Brian, pass out these if you would. This is next week if you don't have it, and it's on responsibility. Just whoever needs it. We passed it out last week, but
This is chapter 3, the first verse. Anybody else?
all right. Standing firm. And I think we only got to the first question last week. Thank you, Ron. Be turning to the book of Esther 3. All right, Neil was doing good today. Quicker on responses, had that smile on his face. Speech was there, usually just one or two words, but he had, when you'd say something, he'd laugh. So things are looking better. Yeah, he FaceTimed Julie. And I put on there, what did he tell you, to bring him some food? Hospital food, yeah. All right, so Neil is doing better. Don't forget that February the 10th is Sweetheart Banquet. Saturday is the chili cook-off, the 27th at 6 o'clock. We forbid white chili. You bring it, we'll put it down the garbage disposal. Mike said he'll eat it. And don't forget that Patrick will be preaching Sunday, and the children, the kiddos, will be doing the Sunday night. And also remember, we had a new addition to our prayer list, and that is Virginia Chester, Alicia's mother-in-law. And proud to have Karen with us tonight. Is Karen? All right, don't feel bad. I forget my own name. Elders and deacons, Sunday afternoon. And if you're not there, we're going to de-deak you, take your sergeant stripes away. Do your best to be there. And it will be concerning the new year and the budget. The what? Kara, we've already ordered them.
She said she did it.
And they're a little bit smaller. They're the size of the one out here in the vestibule. So they have ordered two this size. So, yeah. Every year we do something different. It's on closing the gap between us and God, Hebrews. Did you reread Esther 3? Between chapter 1, Haman is simply introduced. Tells you his father, it tells you his race. But I want you to look at verse 10. In these 10 verses, it goes from, so he took the signet ring from his hand and gave it to Haman, the Agagite. But he closes out with saying, what about Haman? He's what? He was the enemy of the Jews. The Jews apparently had lived in peace, politically, and you didn't have trouble until Haman came along. I think this chapter deals greatly with the providence of God. Do you agree with that? With the idea of God has raised you up for a moment like this. And then Mordecai, her uncle, says, if you don't do it, God will raise up someone else. And so you see God working through these kings. You see it specifically with Cyrus, and the Jews were at peace with Cyrus, and Cyrus provided the material. He provided time off for Nehemiah. Before that, Ezra. And so now you've got a man who has become the enemy of the Jews. Now tonight we're talking about what? Look at your paper. Do we as Bible readers assume things? Human nature. Sometimes we have a preconceived idea because someone's told us something that sounds good, and we trust that person. And so when someone says, no, that's not the way that it really was, let me show you from culture and scripture, they still don't accept it. Well, I've heard that all my life. All right. Tell me why. And if I speak outside of the Bible, David says, spare or hold back my servants from presumptuous sin. People in, and we always use Africa. Man, by the way, I want to thank Elsie. Elsie and I don't know if you know who Mabusa is, right? Mabusa's brother was hit by a car and it broke both his legs. And he texted asking, can you help at all with the bill? And of course, I've got my natural questions that are, even though I didn't say it, how'd you make it without Americans helping? You know, I didn't ask that question, but obviously he's been to the hospital before. But they don't have health insurance, and they've got to stay in the compound because until the bill's paid, but I don't know how someone like that comes up with $1,700. The compound is filthy, and so they get other diseases. And so he texted, and I found an app that we don't have to pay, and we can send money immediately over to Mabusa, and Mabusa gives it to Jeroboam. And so he texted me 2 weeks ago and asked if I could pay for the medicine, and I sent some money. And then he sent a picture. He's got 4 children and 1 adopted, or one that he says he cares for. And he said, the only thing that we've eaten for 2 weeks is hot tea. And Brent, you go to my refrigerator, it would feed half of Africa. And so I sent him some money yesterday, and he sent me a picture back today. with a big bowl of beans and a big bag of rice. Now, brethren, I complain at the cold food. The food is cold at a restaurant. And things like that help you to be far more appreciative of what we have. And so do we assume things? Why? What does the Bible say about Mordecai not bowing down to Haman? All right. But Haman, read it again and just look at it. And I didn't realize this, John, until I was rereading. It really didn't come to his attention until he was told by the guards. And so then I get to thinking, what's wrong with bowing down? And we do know that there are Bible characters that bowed down to a king. So why didn't Mordecai? Do what? He had an ulterior motive? The Bible does not say why he did or did not bow down. It just says he did not bow. And apparently all the other Jews had. But behind this, it's not the bowing down. It is, here's a man who hated the Jews. You would assume, and I have assumed, even though Haman does not fit into this category, a lot of the time the kings or the leaders would ascribe themselves as a god. But Ahasuerus was not there. It was Haman. And so we assume that he was arrogant, he was egocentric, someone didn't bow down, and I always thought, everyone else bowed down, one person hasn't, what big deal is it? But it doesn't say, it doesn't indicate, it just says he didn't bow down. And the guards gave the report. Number one, the king had put a law that you had to bow down to Haman. And so, Mordecai is breaking the law. The guards go and they tell Haman, there's a man here whose laws are different than ours. And he is not bowing down. And brethren, Christians ought to be a different people in society. And by that I do not mean wearing a straight jacket and quoting a Bible passage to everyone that you meet. All right, so Darius had written a decree unchangeable, and Daniel walks up, as the Bible says was his custom, opened the windows, and bowed to the God of Jerusalem. What happened? I mean, isn't that a good time to pretend you're picking up a contact lens or tying a shoe? Or he knew they were looking. He knew they would report him. Who else had their hand up? Brian. Right, let's look at this. So you've quoted Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego, 3 Hebrew children. There were 4 in the furnace. They were not delivered from the furnace. They were delivered through the furnace. He was speared. They were speared, were they not? Absolutely. Go back to Daniel. Daniel bows down 3 times a day and he prays and he's speared, is he not? And Darius meets him in the morning. He did not want, but he had written a decree. He had been deceived. And Darius is there waiting in the morning for Daniel. And so you've got the 3 that were saved. You've got Mordecai that was saved. You've got Daniel that was saved. But turn over to Hebrews chapter 11. And while you're going there, let me ask you this question. Who was responsible for Haman wanting to kill the Jews? Yeah. Start at the top. Who's to blame if the Jews would have been killed? All right. Who's above Mordecai? The king, who had been deceived by who? Haman. So, it was Ahasuerus' fault. He should have not allowed Haman to beguile him.
Haman didn't even run to him and tell him that Mordecai would bow down to him.
No. It was, there's a people out here that's dangerous to you. And so you've got Haman. Haman would have been responsible. Who's to blame? Ahasuerus. Haman. Who did not bow down? Mordecai. And so you see God working in his providence to save the Jewish people. And that's what the whole book of Esther is about. Purim. The casting of the lots. They remembered that. They remembered that they had been saved and that they were going to continue to be preserved. And so God's at work with his children, is he not? Yes, no? God's providence works, does it not? Well, then explain the difference between those characters and the characters that are found in the book of Hebrews chapter 11. Tell me some of the things that happened to God's characters that stood up and stood firm. Do what?
Cain killed Abel.
All right. As you go through, just look at them. Isaiah, sawn in two. Others starved to death. And so where's God in their case? Where's the providence of God working in their case? I mean, we've got a list, and we like that list of God sparing his children. And yet we come to others and we find, where's God? All right, Paul left Tychicus at Miletus sick. When you grab him and say, I've seen you heal. Heal me. What? Why is that case there? A purpose. What purpose? But there were others that did believe. The woman who touched his... Possibly. And I've always been taught it was miracles were given to prove the word. Brethren, how many times did Jesus heal someone and say, don't tell anyone? Brethren, I think the reason for some of the miracles had nothing but compassion. God had compassion on them. Can you imagine what's that chirping? Bob. I've been reading about the massive acacias that we're going to have this year, and here comes one. And so you've got, even within our fellowship, and, we pray and great things happen and we thank God. And yet the same community, the same people of faith will pray and bad things happen. How do you get through that? All right. What was Paul's thorn in the flesh? And this had nothing to do with class, but it... All right, he talks about how large a letter he writes because of his eyes. But when did that start? And did that even come from God? We know that Luke did a lot of writing for Paul. What? Right, look at it carefully and make some assumptions. Do what? Stoned one of those times and never got over it. It's in the context of Paul being called up to where? The third heaven, which would be the dwelling of God. And then Paul, at the end of the vision, was told, don't you tell anybody. That's the context of it. What would happen if Paul went around and told everyone that I've been in the presence of God, I have seen God face to face, called up in a vision? How would the other apostles view Paul? Do what? They'd be envious. May not even believe. And it is in that context and in that picture that God said, do not tell anyone. And the idea of the thorn in the flesh. If you look at the context, look at the story, and look at the placing of it. Doesn't say it before, doesn't say it after it. Just sit back, read the story, and paint the picture in your mind and see what happens. All right, and so you've got the ones that we've talked about, and we're talking about Mordecai here. God spared them. And we look at as many again that God did not spare. What's the difference? If Haman would have accomplished his plan, what would have that meant? Do what? It'd be the annihilation of the Jews. Who came from the Jews? What promise was made to the Jews? Through Abraham. You're going to be a blessed people. You're going to be like the sands of the sea. You're going to be like the stars of the sky. But also through the Jews came who? Came Christ. And so if the Jews would have been annihilated, there would be no Christ. There would be no church. God has been in the story from the beginning to the end. And last week we asked the only question we got to, and that is, think of a time that you stood for your beliefs. How did it affect you? Very seldom do we speak about our faith that the world really torments us. My goodness gracious, you disagree with a brother and a certain brother, it's all over. Every one of us has a different background. I was raised in a good, godly Episcopalian Church of England until I was in my mid-teens. I have no earthly idea what it's like to be beaten, locked in a closet, abused. I had no idea about that. But you've got members, if they opened up and told you their story, it would horrify you. Background helps you to understand behavior. And so, when we stand up for our faith, many times if it disagrees with a particular brother, God's got to rewrite the Bible because they're right and you're wrong. And I have learned that's the reason that most people do not open their mouth in a Bible class. They are afraid. They're afraid of us thinking about, well, man, that's strange. You're strange. Where'd you get that belief from? And so they just sit there. They agree or disagree. It really don't matter. They just sit there because they don't want to be browbeaten. Right, question number 2. What did Mordecai refuse to do? To bow down. We don't know why. Like I said, my first thought would be, well, he'd be bowing down to a god, but Haman wasn't a god. I have no doubt that he knew Haman. He knew the story of Haman and probably knew what he was going to tell the king. Brian? God could have put it in his heart. All right, anyone else? Yes. They had always, and I think part of prophecy, they had always been an enemy and probably always will be an enemy to God's children. Right, number 3. What did the royal officers at the king's gate, the king's gate would be where you came in and out, commerce would be taking place there, much like Jesus and the driving out of those. And brethren, that is not to be used for someone wants to sell something at church. And yet we do that. I mean, a Jew, the head Jews, the leaders of the Jews, taking advantage of their own people is what got God mad. Accepting a non-perfect sacrifice. And I want you to notice that God has allowed everything from a dove all the way up to a bull, according to your needs, what you can afford. God has never expected out of us anything that we cannot provide, even though I do believe that all of Christian service ought to be a sacrifice, not just what we're comfortable with. So what did the royal officers tell at the king's gate, tell Haman about Mordecai's behavior?
First of all, it wasn't just the one contract.
No. And they reminded him, do you not know that there's a law? And then they went and told Haman. And that's when he became an enemy of the Jews.
They were either angry that he wasn't obeying the law, or they were jealous that he got away with it and they didn't.
Yeah. But when he heard that, who do you think was really, whose ego was hurt the most? Got to be Haman.
Has Mordecai ever been elevated for his stopping the assassination of the king?
Not that we know that he was close.
Out there, and then nothing is said, but any other time,
Mhm.
the king would honor that person. So I don't know if that had any effect on it, but it just seems that Mordecai would have been placed on a higher level for stopping the assassination of the king. The king would have been in his debt, not in Haman's debt, because Haman was just
Right.
an official. Later in the book, I think it did.
He was in, we find Mordecai in Ahasuerus' chambers, which would be a bedroom. But so much took place in the bedroom. Business took place. Official duties took place. And so if he's there, he was special to Ahasuerus. And then when Haman repeats the story, and doesn't bring up the idea that it was Mordecai who heard about a plan and revealed it, but Haman. And so when Ahasuerus asked, has this man been honored? Of course, who do you think Haman thought they were talking about, or he's talking about? Himself. And the king says, well, you put him on one of my horses. You put my ring on his finger and everyone must bow. And Haman's head gets bigger and bigger, only to find out that it was who that was going to be honored? The man that he hated. All right, but also in verses 3 through 5. One reason for the guards telling them was to see if Mordecai's word would stand. If he'd stand behind what he said. Christians need to be a people that stand on God's word and behind the cross without compromise. All right, number 4. What was Haman's response to Mordecai's refusal to bow down to him? He is filled with rage and fury. And another thing, you might consider that Haman just didn't want to kill Mordecai. He wanted the Jews. He wanted all of them. All right, how did Haman use his authority to punish Mordecai? What was his plan? What? Get rid of them, and they did that through the rolling of the dice. And it was a long process, 11 months. And so you're looking at the idea of a lot of planning just to take out the Jews.
Basically, the death before the death of
Yes. What I was reading was it had to fall, that dice which had a saying or a blessing on it, had to land on the same month, the same date 3 times. And that's why it took that long. But there is also another book that I was reading, simply talked about, it was rolled and done, but it took 11 months to get the plan going. But either way, Proverbs 16, I think 33, you may roll the dice, but God controls it. All right, question number 6. What character qualities did Mordecai demonstrate? Steadfast. Who what? Loyal. And I'm finding that in society, we get to the point where we just absolutely lack convictions. And if one day a teacher's going to say 2 and 2 is 4, and they're going to be put on administrative leave. We live in a society that could not care less about the truth. What do they care about? Politically correct, my space. And you got to be careful. I mean, if you watch too much Facebook, goodness gracious, the whole world's upside down. No, we live in a pretty good world. All right. Question number 7. What can we learn from the passage about standing firm in our beliefs? We got 2 sides to this coin.
Like Job. Steadfast. What they tell him to do. First God.
All right. Let me give you my wife's translation on that. You let men and women are different. We have different emotions. Here was a wife who saw her children die. She now sees her husband that's unrecognizable sitting at the gate cutting himself. He's black with disease. What in the world do you think a wife and a mother would say? Oh, Job, you're doing such a great job. And here's another thing. We know that God blessed Job with more children. But you can take away my Rachel, you can take away my Caleb, you can take away my Joshua. And you can give me more children. But they are not Rachel, Joshua, and Caleb, even though he was blessed. And I believe God blessed him richly. And so many times we take that statement. It's easy. What would you do? All right. See, Donna's got her own translation. Adam's job was to keep. The word keep does not mean just till. It was his job to keep the Garden of Eden from sin, to guard it. The same word is used of the cherubims that were put there at the Garden of Eden, to guard it, to keep it. Adam and Eve were not allowed back in there. And it was Adam's job. And Adam was there with the command. He was there with when Eve was eating, and she just simply turned. She didn't go hunt him down. I don't know where that idea came from. She handed it to Adam and told him to eat. They were deceived by Satan. And Adam, as the head, did not guard the garden, did not keep the garden. All right, so what Mordecai stood for, and the Bible says that it pleased God, also cost him. In Hebrews chapter 11, those that were slain pleased God, but they were hated for it. And what does Jesus say to us? I don't know when the church came to the idea that we have to please the world. I'll use a Bible word. It behooves me. Somehow we think we've got to be the best buddies to the world. Jesus said they hated me, and what are they going to do with you and I? So why do we believe different? And we can do that in a great way. All right? You start reading, and I'll close with this thought. When you go back and you read the historians of the early age, the church was blamed for being homosexual because men loved men. They are accused of being cannibalistic because they ate the flesh of blood. And they kept on doing it. The church today is blamed for hating women because we don't allow women to preach, to wait on the Lord's table. At what time did we decide, all right, it has never been acceptable, but right now, hey, we've got a new revelation. Guess what we're going to do? All right, stand fast. Next week.
Part of that's probably put more, like some people get higher up because they're preachers. But to me, the ladies that teach those little kids, this is important.
Absolutely. I tell people when they want to call you reverend and every other name, by the name reverend was not God. That was not his name. Holy and reverend is his name. What is his name? And so we say, well, you can't call a preacher reverend. I'm not going to be called reverend anyway. I would like my own car parking space. But God says we are brethren. John fills a role in this congregation. Melissa fills a role. Who's the most important? All right, if anyone's got an extra room in their car, take John home. All right, I appreciate your comments and your time.
Got all them good Get the rebound. Hello. Oh yeah, they're not good. Yeah, they don't know how to play with each other. That was the one thing. Yeah, but he cost us a lot. Yeah, you got a point, but it just drives me nuts when they don't get it.
you're right. I said, you must have a leak. I said, really? He said, yeah, I just threw the meter into the house.
Well, when I seen those, maybe Ron did.
They would go, meter, I didn't even